The outpost sat on a quiet moon that circled a pale blue world. People called the place Haven 7. The name felt kind, like a small promise. Life there moved slowly and safe. At night, the sky showed a thin ring of ice around the planet, and the labs glowed like warm cabins in snow. Most days began with the same soft chime, the same coffee line, the same list of minor tasks. No one thought the pattern would ever break. Daniel Carter liked the quiet. He was a systems engineer who fixed things before they broke. He spent time in the power room, where the hum of the reactor sounded like a low, friendly note. He checked the cooling flow, he watched the grid, and he wrote patient notes for the next shift. He was the sort of person who saved labels and kept old screws in small cups because one day a cup would help. People teased him for it, but when a pump failed at 2 a.m, his small cups made sense. Laura Bennett worked in communications. She kept the dish aligned, watched for strange signals, and kept the outpost linked to far places. She sent messages to families on distant worlds. She helped scientists file data reports. She liked the calm rhythm of the job. On her break, she read old paper books, the kind that still smelled like ink and glue. She had one plant on her desk. She talked to it sometimes in a joking way, as if it were one more coworker who needed updates. There were about 60 people on Haven 7. Some were young and excited to be off Earth for the first time. Some were older and still curious about rocks and ice and old craters. A small team studied the minerals in the moon's crust. Another team kept weather satellites working in the thin orbit above. There was a little gym with a treadmill that bounced. There was a kitchen where the cook, a quiet man named Adam, made pancakes on rest days and smiled when people asked for seconds. Each morning began with a short meeting in the main hall. They called it the circle, but it was a long table with scuffs on the edge. The rule was simple. Speak once, say what you will do, and listen to the others. Daniel would say he would inspect the North Relay. Laura would say she would run a full link test with the relay station on the planet. The science lady, a woman named Mia Brooks, would say she would review the new drill samples. After the circle, people went to work. The doors hissed, boots thudded, coffee cooled. On one such morning, Daniel felt a small worry he could not place. The reactor hum was a little rough, like a singer with a cold. He checked the gauges. Everything was fine. He wrote a note to swap out a filter next week. He did not rush. There was no reason to rush. He checked a second readout. It agreed with the first. His worry faded. Laura finished a long call with a clinic on the nearest colony world. A child there had sent a drawing for her aunt who worked in the lab. The drawing showed the outpost as a castle with flags. Laura smiled at the thought. She sent the drawing to the lab and received a string of happy faces back. She opened her book again. She read one page, then another. The plant on her desk leaned toward the light. She reached out and turned the pot a little so it would grow straight. At midday, the dish began to pick up a low pulse from the far side of the system. It was not a voice, not a language, just a steady beat that rose and fell like a drum in a different room. Laura frowned and called Daniel over the line. He answered on the second ring. She told him about the pulse. He asked if it matched any known beacon. She said it did not. He said he would be there in 5 minutes. Daniel arrived with his toolkit. He checked the dish. He checked the signal path. He looked at the screen and saw the pattern. It looked simple at first, but then it changed in a way that felt planned. He felt his chest tighten. He asked Laura to bring up the long-range map. Lights marked known stations. Lines showed safe lanes. The pulse moved in a line that matched no safe lane at all. It was coming in fast. Mia came in and asked what was wrong. Laura told her to alert the duty officer. The duty officer, a calm man named Evan, came at once. He watched the screen for a long few seconds. Then he said a word that changed the room.
He said contact.
He told Laura to send a hail in standard code. She did. No answer came back. He told her to send again and to send in plain voice. She did. The pulse grew louder and the line on the map moved closer. The alarm sounded. It was a flat tone that none of them had heard outside of drills. The tone made the hallway lights change from warm yellow to sharp white. Doors that were always open slid shut with a heavy thump. People looked up from their work and felt their bodies get small. Daniel felt his hands grow cold. He told himself to breathe. He ran a quick test on the shield grid and saw the numbers he wanted. He spoke into the comm and told the power room to bring the main shield online. The reply came back at once. It said, "Shield is up." Through the small window near Laura's station, the sky showed dark ships slide into view. They were shaped like long knives with edges that caught the light in strange ways. They were not like any ships in the files. No flag, no transponder, no request to dock. The first shot came without warning. It cut a neat line across the old maintenance dome and turned it into dust. The second shot struck the north relay that Daniel had planned to check next week. It burned bright and then went out. People moved in quiet lines toward safe rooms. Training took over. The cook pushed a cart against a door to keep it from swinging back too fast. A mechanic carried a small dog from the recycler shop and tucked it inside his own jacket. Mia held a box of samples close to her chest and whispered that it would be okay, even though she knew words could not stop fire. Evan's voice came over the speakers. He said to stay calm and stay together. He said help was on the way. He believed it when he said it. Laura tried the hail again. She tried it in 3 more codes. Then she sent one last call that was not to the ships at all. It was to Earth. She sent the recorded pulse and the first 2 seconds of the attack. She sent the outpost name and its grid. She sent the word help once and did not add anything more. She looked at the screen. The send bar crawled across it like a slow worm. The room shook. Dust fell from a vent. The bar kept crawling. It reached the end and flashed delivered. She let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. Daniel stayed at the shield panel and watched the energy drain like water from a cracked tank. The grid was strong, but the hits kept coming. He rerouted power from the ore smelter. He shut down the gym lights and the greenhouse grow lamps. He told the water pumps to idle. He asked the reactor for a little more. It gave him what it could. The shield shone, faded, and shone again. He thought of his brother back on Earth, who had always told him to keep his head when others lost theirs. He kept his head. The ships began to land small carrier pods around the outpost. The pods opened and tall shapes moved out in careful steps. They wore thin armor that looked like black glass. They carried tools that cut metal like it was paper. One of them walked up to the front gate and touched the lock with its tool. The lock melted. The gate fell inward. The shapes did not rush. They moved like people who knew they would not be stopped. Inside, Evan formed a small team to hold the main hall. They had light rifles that the security crew used for drills and for the rare wild animal scare. Against glass armor, a light rifle was a hope more than a plan, but a hope is still something you can aim. Evan placed 2 people on the balcony and 2 behind the long table. He told them not to fire until he said so. He asked Daniel how long the shield could hold. Daniel said minutes. He did not say how few. Laura saw a short reply arrive from the relay station on the planet. The message was only a burst. It said that the relay would broadcast the distress to every channel and would route it through deep space relays toward Earth. The message ended there. She felt a small strand of relief. She looked at her plant. It had fallen over in its pot. She put it upright with gentle fingers. The simple act made her feel steady again. Another blast hit the shield and made the air shiver. The lights flickered. In the main hall, Evan gave the order. The first 2 shots from the balcony rang out bright and sharp. One of the tall shapes fell. The others turned their glass faces up and returned fire. A line of heat swept across the balcony railing and carved it in half. The 2 guards rolled back behind cover. The long table took a hit and sent chips of wood across the floor. Evan kept his team low and moving. He did not let panic get inside his words. Daniel rerouted power one more time. Numbers he had only seen in old training slides glowed on his screen. He heard the crack of fire from the hall and knew people he had eaten with were risking everything to buy seconds. He told the grid to shift load to the southern emitters. He asked the reactor to give a surge. He felt the floor hum deeper. The shield steadied, then began to sag again under the hail of fire from above. Laura opened a channel to the safe rooms and spoke quietly. She told the people there that the distress had gone out, that their names were on the way, that Earth would hear them. A child's voice asked if the outpost would be okay. Laura said yes in a way that meant maybe. She tried not to let the child hear her breath shake. She closed the line and took one more look at the dish alignment. Even under attack, the dish held true. Smoke leaked into the corridor from a vent that led to the north wing. Daniel grabbed a small extinguisher and sprayed the vent screen so the filter would not burn. He coughed, blinked, and kept moving. He tapped a code that... On Earth, the news of the attack reached the command halls like a knife through quiet air. The transmission from Haven 7 was short and broken, but it was enough. The cries, the noise of falling walls, the word help carried across space. It arrived in the middle of the night at United Nations Space Command headquarters. Officers woke from their bunks, screens lit up, and voices filled the air. The word Outpost was spoken again and again, mixed with fear and anger. President Laura Mitchell was in her residence when her security team brought the report. She stood at her window for a long time before she answered. Her face was calm, but her hands trembled a little. She asked if the distress was confirmed. The reply came back that it was. She asked how many people were on Haven 7. The answer was 60, maybe more. She turned from the window and walked to her desk. She told her staff to gather the council by dawn. By morning, the great chamber was filled. Leaders of Earth's colonies joined by HoloLink. Military chiefs stood in their uniforms, and scientists who had known people on Haven 7 stood with them. The air was heavy with sorrow and also with fire. When the recording of the last moments played, the chamber grew still. The sound of the alarm, the crash, the word help echoed in the large room. Some leaders bowed their heads. Others clenched their fists. No one could pretend it was only a small event. It was not an accident. It was murder. Admiral Richard Hayes stood tall at the front. He had gray hair and steady eyes that had seen other wars. He did not rush to speak. He let the chamber breathe for a moment. Then he said the truth. He said that humanity had been struck, and the strike was meant to test if they would endure or fold. He said that the answer had to be clear, or more strikes would come. His voice was deep, and every person in the chamber heard the weight in it. Families of the lost gathered outside the chamber. They held pictures, they lit candles, and they demanded action. The media carried their voices to every home on Earth and across the colonies. A mother cried out that her daughter had gone to study stars, not to die at the hands of strangers. A father shouted that Earth had to answer now, or it would never be safe again. Crowds grew in the streets of major cities calling for justice. The people had made their choice before the leaders could even vote. President Mitchell looked at Admiral Hayes. She asked him if Earth had the power to answer. He nodded once. He said Earth's fleets were ready. They had been built not for pride but for defense, and now defense had to mean more than shields. It had to mean a strike that none would forget. She asked him if the strike would bring risk of a wider war. He said the risk was already here. The choice was between fear and resolve. She listened, then she stood, and she told the chamber that Earth would not hide. Orders spread fast. At the Mars shipyards, the largest fleet in human history began to gather. They called it Task Force Orion. Ships of every class moved into formation. Carriers like floating cities, destroyers like knives, corvettes swift as arrows. Their hulls gleamed under the red light of Mars. Engineers worked day and night to fuel them, arm them, and test their systems. Families stood on the docks to wave goodbye to crews. Some would never see each other again, but no one said it out loud. Among those who joined was Captain Ryan Carter, a Marine officer. He was the brother of Daniel Carter from Haven 7. When he heard of the attack, he did not wait for a call. He walked into the enlistment office and asked for the first ship out. His request was granted without question. He carried the memory of his brother like a weight that pressed him forward. He told his squad that they were not fighting for medals, but for every name lost in the cold silence of the outpost. Laura Bennett's family lived on Earth. When the news reached them, her younger sister sat in front of the screen and wept. She did not know if Laura was alive or gone, but she begged to join the support effort. She worked at the command center, sorting messages, sending updates, and helping families stay connected. She wore her sister's old scarf as if it were armor. She whispered that Laura would come back even when she feared the worst. Across Earth, across the colonies, people prepared in their own way. Some planted flags in their yards. Some wrote letters to crews they did not know. Children drew pictures of ships and stars and handed them to soldiers boarding transports. The weight of sorrow turned into a storm of will. Humanity had been struck, and now humanity would rise. Admiral Hayes spent his nights in the war room drawing plans. He did not sleep much. He looked at maps of alien space, at files of past contact, at every scrap of signal they had ever captured. He spoke with his officers. He listened to them argue. He did not choose the easy target. He did not plan a strike at the border or a raid on a single fleet. He aimed for the heart. He aimed for the system that was the center of the enemy's power. He told his staff that if humanity struck, it must strike so hard that none would dare test them again. The fleet left Mars 1 week later. The launch was broadcast live. Billions watched. The sky above Mars lit up with engines as the great ships rose in silence. Their trails burned bright, then faded into the black. The announcers spoke of courage and honor. The crowds cheered and wept. The names of Haven 7's lost were read aloud as the ships vanished into jump space. The sound carried across every channel. The galaxy was listening. Ryan Carter stood at the window of his transport and watched Mars shrink behind him. He thought of his brother's voice, calm and steady, and he swore he would carry it with him. He checked his rifle, checked his armor, checked his squad. They looked at him with the same grief, the same fire. He told them that they were the hand of Earth now. They nodded and sat in silence. On Earth, President Mitchell gave a speech. She stood in front of a simple flag. She spoke without flourish. She said Earth did not seek war, but Earth would not accept slaughter. She said the names of Haven 7 were carved into history now, and that their memory carried the fleet forward. She said the galaxy would know that humanity was patient but not weak. Her voice was strong and her eyes were sharp. People felt the words deep in their hearts. In the command halls, Laura's sister sat with headphones on. She listened to the faint signals of the fleet as it traveled. She marked their progress on a glowing map. Each light that moved forward felt like a promise. She whispered her sister's name and pressed the scarf to her lips. She told herself that the fleet would be fast enough, strong enough, fierce enough to make a difference. Meanwhile, in the dark between stars, the alien empire sent out new broadcasts. They showed the burning outpost as if it were a trophy. They mocked humanity with images of glass-armored soldiers standing over ruins. They laughed in voices like stone. They sent the message that humans were prey. These broadcasts reached colonies and people watched with horror and rage. If the enemy meant to frighten, it failed. The mockery only sharpened resolve. Children who had never thought of war now spoke of joining when they were old enough. Old veterans asked to return to service. Humanity did not bow. Humanity rose taller. Admiral Hayes watched the broadcasts in silence. He let them play out, then he turned them off. He told his officers that the enemy had already written their fate. They believed humanity would break. They would learn otherwise. He tapped the map of the enemy's home system. He said that was where Task Force Orion would go. Not to skirmish, not to warn, but to end. Back on Earth, in small towns and large cities, people lived with new tension. Sirens tested once a week. Schools practiced drills. Families stocked food and water. Yet at night the stars seemed closer. People looked up and whispered promises to the lost, to the fleet, to themselves. They said they would not forget. They said they would endure. They said they would see justice done. In the barracks of a carrier, Ryan Carter wrote a letter he would never send. He wrote it to Daniel. He told him about the fleet, about the plan, about the weight of carrying his name. He folded the letter and kept it in his chest pocket. He felt it against his heart when he slept. It was a reminder of why he was there, of what had been taken, of what had to be done. The fleet traveled in silence, each jump carrying them closer. Pilots trained in sims that showed enemy ships. Marines drilled in corridors until their muscles burned. Engineers checked systems again and again. No one complained. No one asked why. They all knew. They had all seen the outpost burning in the broadcast. They carried that image like a wound and like a flame. President Mitchell met with the council again. Reports came in of unrest in other parts of the galaxy. Some species called for caution, afraid of Earth's next step. Others sent quiet offers of alliance, sensing a shift in power. The council listened, but their path was set. They would not stop. They would not turn aside. They would show the galaxy that Earth's line, once crossed, would not be crossed again. As the fleet drew closer to the enemy system, the tension grew. Ryan Carter stood with his squad in the hold of their ship. He spoke to them not as soldiers, but as brothers and sisters. He said they would stand for those who had no chance to stand at Haven 7. He said the names of Daniel, Laura, Mia, Evan, Adam, and others. He said each name was a shield around their hearts. He told them that when the time came, they would not falter. They would strike with all of Earth behind them. The ships moved on, engines burning bright against the dark. The fleet moved through the dark, a long line of ships gliding in silence. Engines glowed faintly, leaving thin trails that faded into the endless night. Every person on board knew why they were there. They carried the memory of Haven 7. and they carried the voices of their families waiting back home. The weight of the mission pressed on them, but it did not break them. Instead, it gave them strength. Admiral Hayes stood on the bridge of the flagship, a massive carrier that held hundreds of crew members. He looked at the star map in front of him. Small lights marked the enemy system. It was their target, and he did not look away from it. His officers waited for his words. He spoke calmly, telling them that every choice they made in the next few days would matter for generations. He reminded them that Earth did not fight for conquest. They fought for survival, for justice, and for the memory of those lost. Across the fleet, Marines trained in the holds of ships. Captain Ryan Carter led his squad with steady hands. His men and women looked to him, knowing that he carried the loss of his brother. He did not hide his grief, but he did not let it control him either. He turned it into strength. When he spoke, his words were simple. He told them they were not only soldiers, but the voice of Earth's answer. Each of them carried the weight of millions. Each of them was the line that stood between humanity and fear. Days passed in the cold dark. Pilots drilled again and again, flying in formation, simulating attacks and learning how to move as one body. Engineers checked the great engines, making sure no part would fail. Medical staff trained to handle the wounded, setting up makeshift wards in case the battle grew long. Even the cooks worked without rest, preparing meals that would keep crews strong. No one complained. No one asked to turn back. The fleet was more than steel. It was will. At night, when training was over, some spoke quietly in their bunks. They told stories of home, of fields and rivers, of families waiting for them. Some wrote letters, though they knew they might never send them. Ryan Carter wrote another letter to Daniel. He told his brother that he hoped his actions would honor him. He told him he carried his name like a shield. He folded the letter and placed it with the one he had already written. He pressed them close to his chest and closed his eyes. In the command halls on Earth, the council followed every signal from the fleet. Families gathered at viewing centers, watching glowing maps that showed the ships moving closer to the enemy. They prayed, they sang, they stood in silence together. President Mitchell visited the families herself. She shook hands. She listened to their fears, and she promised them that Earth would not rest until justice was done. Her words carried weight because people saw the truth in her eyes. She too had lost friends on Haven 7. She too carried grief. The enemy, in their pride, broadcast more messages across the stars. They showed their glass-armored soldiers marching through the ruins of the Outpost. They mocked Earth's call for help. They said humanity was weak, that their fire would not reach so far. These broadcasts did not frighten Earth. They did the opposite. People watched them with anger, with resolve, and with a promise to themselves that the enemy would learn what it meant to wake Earth's strength. One night, as the fleet neared its target, Ryan stood alone at a small window. The stars were sharp points of white in the black. He thought of Daniel working in the power room, calm and careful. He thought of how his brother must have felt when the first shots fell. Ryan clenched his hands and swore that the enemy would pay. He swore that they would never again believe humanity was weak prey. He stood there for a long time until a fellow Marine came and placed a hand on his shoulder. No words were needed. They both knew. The next day, Admiral Hayes called a full briefing. Every officer, every squad leader, every pilot listened. He laid out the plan. Task Force Orion would strike not at the edges but at the core. The fleet would arrive in the enemy's central system, where their star burned bright and their cities circled in long arcs. The first wave would target shipyards and defense stations. The second wave would cut supply lines and disrupt communications. The third wave, the final strike, would bring out Earth's most secret weapon, the stellar lance, a weapon that could pierce the very heart of a star. When the officers heard this, the room grew silent. They understood what it meant. This was not just a raid. This was not only about ships and soldiers. It was about ending the threat at its root. Admiral Hayes looked at them and said the choice was clear. If they did nothing less, the enemy would rise again. If they struck with all they had, the galaxy would know Earth's patience had limits. As the fleet prepared, Ryan's squad received their orders. They would be among the first boots on the ground if boarding actions were needed. Their job would be dangerous. They would cut into enemy stations, hold choke points, and fight room by room if needed. Ryan told his squad that he believed in them. He told them that fear was natural, but courage was choosing to move anyway. His words stayed with them long after he finished speaking. Hours passed, and then the call came. The fleet had reached the edge of the enemy system. Alarms sounded and lights turned red. Pilots ran to their ships. Marines strapped into armor. The bridge of every vessel came alive with movement. Admiral Hayes gave one command: advance. The first sight of the enemy system filled the screens. Planets orbited in wide circles, some rich with cities, some lined with towers of metal. Near the star, vast docks held fleets of alien warships. Their shapes were sharp, their armor gleamed like black glass. The enemy had been waiting, confident in their strength. But they had never faced Task Force Orion. The first shots lit the dark. Earth's destroyers fired long beams that cut through alien lines. Fighters swarmed out of carriers, darting through the chaos. Alien ships moved to meet them, their weapons flashing. The sky turned into a storm of light and fire. The battle had begun. Ryan sat in the hold of his transport with his squad. They felt the ship shake as it pushed through enemy fire. He kept his voice steady, reminding them of their training. He told them to remember the faces of the fallen. He told them to remember Haven 7. The doors of the transport glowed as heat pressed against them, but the ship kept moving. The pilot's voice came through, calm and strong. They were nearing the target. On the flagship, Admiral Hayes gave orders with precision. He directed fleets to flank, to push, to strike where the enemy was weakest. He did not raise his voice. He spoke like a man who had prepared for this moment his entire life. His officers moved like extensions of his will. The enemy's first lines began to falter. At the same time, Earth's secret weapon was prepared. The stellar lance was vast, stretching across the spine of a battleship. Its power core glowed with dangerous light. Engineers worked at the controls, their faces tense. They knew what it could do, and they knew it had never been used in real battle. Admiral Hayes gave the order to ready it, but not to fire yet. Timing would be everything. Ryan's squad entered their first fight on a defense station that hung above the second planet. The transport slammed into the station hull, cutting a hole through. The Marines poured in. The air was thick with smoke and the strange smell of alien air. The enemy soldiers moved with calm precision, their glass armor shining in the firelight. Blades of energy cut through metal. Ryan shouted commands. His squad moved fast, covering each other, taking ground step by step. Bullets sparked against armor, but steady fire found weak points. One by one, alien soldiers fell. But so did humans. A Marine named Clark, who had joked the night before about pancakes, went down with a flash. Ryan forced himself to keep moving, even as his heart cracked. He shouted louder, leading his squad deeper into the station. They reached the control room, blasted the locks, and planted charges. When they pulled back, the station shook and then went dark. The path was open. In orbit, the battle grew hotter. Alien ships tried to encircle the fleet, but Earth's pilots struck like hawks, breaking their wings. Carriers released more waves of fighters. Battleships fired heavy rounds that tore through enemy hulls. Yet the enemy did not retreat. They fought with the confidence of those who believed they could not lose. That belief began to fade as more of their ships broke apart. Finally, the call came to fire the stellar lance. The weapon lit up, a beam brighter than anything the human fleet had ever unleashed. It cut through the black and struck the star itself. The core of the star shook, light flared, and waves of energy rippled out. The enemy fleet faltered, their ships thrown into chaos. Some engines failed, some weapons went dark. Admiral Hayes gave the order to press forward. Ryan's squad fought room by room, clearing the station of resistance. When the last alien fell, Ryan leaned against a wall, breathing hard. His armor was scorched, his rifle hot, but his spirit unbroken. He looked at his squad. Some were gone, but those who stood were stronger than ever. He told them the fight was not over. He told them they would keep going until the enemy could never harm Haven 7 or any place like it again. In the black sky above, ships burned, fleets clashed, and the star itself trembled. Humanity had entered the heart of the enemy, and the storm had only begun. The enemy system burned with fire and smoke as the battle raged on. Human ships moved in tight formations, striking again and again. Alien warships broke apart under the heavy fire, their black glass armor no longer enough to save them. The star itself flared with anger from the hit of the stellar lance, and the waves of energy spread like ripples across the system. It was chaos, but in that chaos, Earth's fleet held strong. Admiral Hayes stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching every screen. He saw where the enemy lines broke and where his own forces pressed forward. He gave clear commands, his voice steady, his mind sharp. His crew moved with precision. Every ship in the fleet trusted his hand, and they followed his orders without hesitation. Hayes knew this was the moment Earth would be remembered for. He carried the weight of all humanity on his shoulders, but he did not bend under it. Ryan Carter fought inside the enemy station with his squad. Smoke stung his eyes and the heat of burned metal filled the air. The Marines moved down narrow corridors, rifles raised, hearts pounding. Alien soldiers met them at every turn. The glass-armored figures fought without fear, their energy weapons tearing through walls and doors. But Ryan's squad pushed forward. Step by step, room by room, they cleared the path. Ryan's voice rang out over the comm, giving orders, keeping his people alive. The station shook as Earth's fleet outside unleashed another wave of strikes. Explosions rolled through the halls, lights flickered, and alarms screamed in strange alien tones. Ryan planted charges in a control room and pulled his squad back just in time. The blast tore through the walls, cutting off enemy reinforcements. The squad cheered for a moment, then fell silent, remembering the ones who had already fallen. Ryan kept moving, his jaw set. He would not stop until the fight was done. Above the station, fighters darted like angry sparks. Human pilots flew with skill and courage, weaving through the enemy lines, cutting down ships that tried to regroup. Alien fighters swarmed in response, but Earth's pilots moved as one. They covered each other, they shouted warnings, they dove into danger without hesitation. For every human ship that fell, 5 alien ships burned. The balance of the battle was shifting, and the enemy could feel it. On another flank, human destroyers targeted the alien shipyards. Massive beams of energy struck the docks, tearing them apart piece by piece. The enemy's ability to build more ships was vanishing in flames. Explosions lit the sky as towers of metal crumbled. The black glass ships that had once seemed endless now looked fragile and broken. Humanity was showing its true strength. Admiral Hayes received reports from every corner of the battle. Losses were heavy, but progress was real. He listened to each officer, gave orders, and never once raised his voice. He turned to the Stellar Lance team and asked for a second strike. The engineers hesitated. The weapon was unstable. It had never been fired twice in such a short time. But Hayes looked at them and said it had to be done. The engineers nodded and worked with shaking hands. They knew what was at stake. The Stellar Lance fired again, and the star roared in response. A blinding wave of light spread across the system, forcing ships to shield their sensors. Alien defenses flickered and died. Stations went dark. The enemy fleet faltered, their confidence crumbling at last. The system that had once seemed untouchable was now breaking apart. Hayes gave the order to press harder, to finish what had begun. Ryan and his squad reached the core of the station. Alien guards waited there in heavy numbers. The fight was brutal, close, and desperate. Blades of energy clashed with rifle fire. Marines shouted, bled, and fought with everything they had. Ryan saw one of his squad fall and then another. He shouted louder, pushing the survivors forward. They reached the control core and planted the final charges. Ryan stayed behind to hold the line while his squad pulled back. He fought like a man with nothing left to lose, like a man carrying the memory of Haven 7 in his heart. When the last charge was armed, he ran for the exit, his armor scorched, his body heavy but his will unbroken. The station exploded in a wave of fire that lit the dark. Human ships pulled away just in time, watching the enemy stronghold vanish in flames. Ryan's squad stumbled back into their transport, breathing hard, covered in dust and blood. They looked at each other and knew they had survived something impossible. They had torn out a piece of the enemy's heart, and they were still standing. Admiral Hayes received the report and nodded once. Another step forward, another victory carved out of fire, but he knew the battle was not done. The enemy's planet still stood. Their fleet still fought, though weaker with each passing hour. Hayes turned to his staff and said the words they had been waiting for. It was time to end it. The order spread through the fleet. Earth's warships aligned in formation. Battleships targeted the defense grids around the inner planets. Carriers launched every fighter they had left. Marines prepared for more boarding actions. Engineers worked without pause, patching damage, rerouting power, keeping ships alive. The fleet moved as one, a hammer ready to strike. The enemy tried one last desperate push. Their largest ships gathered around the inner world, black glass shining like a wall of blades. They fired everything they had, filling the sky with streams of fire. Human ships met them head-on. Beams clashed, missiles roared, fighters screamed through the chaos. The clash shook the system, but slowly, piece by piece, the wall of blades broke apart. Human firepower and human resolve were too much. The enemy's pride turned into panic. Their formation collapsed. At that moment, Admiral Hayes gave the command to unleash the final strike. The stellar lance fired one last time. The beam pierced the heart of the star, and this time the star began to die. Its light grew wild and unstable. Its surface rippled with violent storms. The enemy fleet faltered, their ships thrown into confusion as gravity shifted and energy waves tore through space. Hayes ordered the fleet to pull back, just far enough to be safe and to watch. Ryan sat in his transport watching the screens as the star burned brighter and brighter. He felt the heat of it even through the shields. He knew what it meant. The enemy's system, their home, their pride, was finished. The star would take everything with it. Their worlds, their fleets, their future, all gone in fire. The star collapsed and the planets near it were consumed in waves of flame. Whole cities vanished in seconds. Towers crumbled, oceans boiled, and the sky turned into fire. The enemy had mocked humanity, had called them weak, had believed they could strike and walk away. Now they saw the truth. Earth was not prey. Earth was power. Earth was fire. The fleet pulled back to safe distance and watched the system die. The silence on the comms was heavy. No one cheered. No one shouted. They all understood the weight of what had been done. An entire system erased. Millions gone in moments. Justice had been delivered, but it was a hard justice, and its cost was deep. Ryan leaned back in his seat, exhausted. He thought of his brother, of Haven 7, of the lives lost. He whispered that it was done, that they could rest now. His squad sat in silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts. They had fought, they had survived, but none of them felt joy. They felt only the heavy truth of what war meant. Admiral Hayes stood on the bridge, watching the star's last light fade. He thought of every life lost, human and alien. He knew history would remember this day. Some would call it victory, some would call it terror, but no one would ever forget it. Earth had spoken, and the galaxy would listen. The fleet turned and began the journey home. Engines lit up, carrying them away from the ashes of the enemy. Behind them, a system burned no more. Ahead of them, Earth waited, holding its breath for their return. Humanity had shown its strength, and the galaxy would never see them the same way again. The long journey home began in silence. The fleet moved away from the ruins of the enemy system, their engines burning steady trails through the dark. Behind them, there was nothing but ashes and the broken glow of a dead star. Every ship carried scars. Some had holes patched with quick repairs. Some had lost engines, and some carried the weight of too many empty bunks. Yet they kept moving. They were going home. On the flagship, Admiral Hayes stood at the main window. His face was pale and his eyes tired, but his back was still straight. He thought of the choice he had made, of the order to fire the stellar lance not once but 3 times. He thought of the star collapsing, of planets breaking apart. He wondered how history would judge him. He did not regret, but he knew the cost. Victory was never clean. Victory always came with shadows. Reports came in from every ship. Squads counted their losses. Medical bays were full of wounded, some whispering for family, some staring blankly at the ceiling. Engineers worked without pause, patching systems so the ships could make the long trip home. Pilots who had lost their wingmen sat in silence, helmets resting in their laps. The weight of grief spread across the fleet, but under it was also a steady fire of pride. They had answered Haven 7. They had stood for Earth. No one could take that from them. Ryan Carter sat with his squad in the hold of their transport. Their armor was scorched, their rifles dented, but they were alive. They had fought through fire and loss, and they were still breathing. Ryan looked at each of them, counting their faces, knowing how many were gone. He thought of Daniel, of his calm voice, of his quiet patience. He whispered to himself that his brother could rest now. He had kept his promise. The squad spoke little. They shared food packs, they cleaned their weapons, and they sat close together. They did not need many words. They had been through something few could understand. The bond between them was stronger than any steel. One Marine hummed a song softly, an old tune from Earth. Others listened, eyes closed, and for a moment the war felt far away. Back on Earth, the people waited. News of the fleet's victory spread quickly. The Council announced that the enemy's central system had fallen, that their fleets were gone, that their pride was broken. Across the colonies, people lit candles, held vigils, and spoke the names of Haven 7. For the families, the victory brought no one back, but it brought a sense of justice. The lost had not been forgotten. The galaxy had heard their cry. President Mitchell spoke to the world. She stood before the flag of Earth, her voice steady. She told the people that the fleet was on its way home, that they had carried out the hardest task any force had ever faced. She said Earth had shown it would not bow to fear. She said humanity had proven its strength. But she also reminded them of the cost. She spoke of the lives lost, of the weight of war, and she promised to honor them. Her words carried to every home, to every colony, to every person who had waited in silence. When the fleet drew near, ships from Earth and the colonies moved to meet them. The sky above Earth filled with lights as escorts welcomed the returning warriors. Crowds gathered in every city watching the sky, waiting for the first sign of the fleet. When the ships finally appeared, breaking through the clouds, cheers erupted. Bells rang, voices shouted, tears flowed. Humanity was welcoming its heroes home. Admiral Hayes stepped off the flagship onto the landing dock. He was met with silence at first. People stood still, watching him, knowing what he had done. Then one voice began to clap, then another, and soon the entire dock thundered with applause. Hayes did not smile. He simply nodded once, acknowledging them. He knew he was no hero. He was a man who had made a choice. But he accepted their respect with quiet grace. Ryan Carter and his squad walked down from their transport. Families rushed forward to meet their own, hugging, crying, holding tight. Ryan stood a little apart, watching. He did not expect anyone to come for him. Then he saw Laura Bennett's younger sister in the crowd. She wore the same scarf, her eyes wide with hope. She asked Ryan if he had seen her sister. Ryan shook his head, his heart heavy. But he told her that Laura had fought bravely, that her signal had reached Earth, that she had saved lives even in her last moments. The young woman cried, but she also smiled faintly, knowing her sister's courage had mattered. The memorial for Haven 7 was built quickly. It stood in the heart of Earth's capital, a tall pillar of white stone with 60 names carved into it. Families came from across the colonies to see it. They laid flowers, candles, and photos at its base. Ryan stood before it with his squad, reading the names slowly. He touched Daniel's name with his hand and whispered a promise to live in a way that would honor him. He did not cry. His eyes were dry, but his heart ached deeply. President Mitchell gave a final speech at the memorial. She told the gathered crowds that Haven 7 would never be forgotten, that its people had been the spark that lit Earth's resolve. She said the galaxy now knew humanity's strength, but she warned that strength should not be used for conquest. It was to be used for defense, for justice, for peace. Her words echoed through the city and people held them close. Across the galaxy, other species watched. Some spoke in fear, saying Earth had gone too far, that destroying a system was a power too great to be trusted. Others spoke in respect, saying Earth had proven itself, that it could not be ignored or dismissed. Some whispered of alliance, some whispered of war, but all knew the truth. Humanity was no longer the quiet newcomer. Humanity was a force that could not be crossed. In the weeks that followed, the fleet returned to their duties. Ships were repaired, crews were given time with their families, and new recruits joined with fresh resolve. The memory of the battle was still raw, but it forged a new spirit. Children spoke of one day joining the fleet. Artists painted scenes of ships in fire, of the Outpost's last call, of the moment Earth struck back. Songs were written, stories told, all carrying the same truth. Earth had answered. Ryan Carter tried to find peace. He visited his family. He sat in his childhood home. He walked through fields where he and Daniel had once played, but the memories of war followed him. He dreamed of the station, of fire, of the sound of weapons. He woke in the night with his fists clenched. Yet he kept moving forward. He trained new recruits, passing on the lessons he had learned. He told them of courage, of loss, of duty. He told them to never forget Haven 7. Admiral Hayes retired not long after. He stepped away from command, knowing he had given all he could. He spent his days in a quiet house by the sea, walking the shore in the mornings, sitting with old friends in the evenings. He did not seek fame or power. He sought peace, though he knew it would never fully come. He carried the memory of the star's collapse with him, and it would never leave. But he also carried the knowledge that Earth was safe, at least for now. President Mitchell led with steady hands. She guided Earth through the storm of fear and pride that followed. She built new alliances, strengthened the colonies, and reminded everyone of the cost of war. She did not allow Earth to become arrogant. She reminded her people that power without wisdom was only another form of weakness. Her leadership shaped a new age for humanity, The galaxy would never forget what had happened. The enemy who had struck Haven 7 no longer had a system, no longer had a fleet, no longer had a voice. They had been erased not out of cruelty but out of necessity. They had crossed a line and Earth had shown the price of such arrogance. The lesson spread far and wide, carried on whispers, on screens, on the silent fear in the eyes of other leaders. Years later, children still spoke the names of Haven 7 in schools. They learned of the Outpost, of the attack, of the fleet that rose in answer. They learned of Admiral Hayes, of President Mitchell, of Captain Ryan Carter. They learned that Earth's strength was born not from a desire to rule, but from a promise to protect. And they learned that when humanity said enough, the galaxy listened. Ryan Carter stood once more at the memorial, years after the battle. He placed a single flower at Daniel's name. He looked up at the sky, at the stars shining bright. He whispered that they had kept the promise, that humanity had stood together, that the galaxy now knew who they were. Then he turned and walked away, his steps steady, his heart heavy but also strong. The story of Haven 7 had begun with fire and loss. It had ended with strength and resolve. The galaxy would carry it forever, and Earth, though scarred, would rise again and again, ready to defend, ready to endure, ready to show the truth. Humanity was never weak, and when pushed, humanity's answer was final.